Okay, today I'm going to demonstrate how to set up a Twilio demonstration for SMS text messaging and for voice messaging on a ViewLink server. You can take a look at my screen right now. I'm logged into the ViewLink test server here that I have set up, and I have a login for my Twilio account. So basically, I've already gone through and created an account with Twilio, and this is a test account. One of the options that you have with them is you have the ability to create a demo trial account. So you go through a process to create the trial account, and they give you basically a budget of like $10 for the trial balance. You can add to it as you go through testing. If you're going to do a substantial amount of testing with this, you're going to want to increase that amount. When you log in and you create an account, you'll have this option on here under console, which here I have my console set up. I've named it test.viewlink.vaisala.com, which is the name of my demo server. As you can see, that's my demo server right here. So essentially here, I have a little bit of budget left on here. I'm going to set up this demo server to be able to communicate. Now, when you set up a trial account, it's only going to be for a few days. Essentially, the way Twilio handles this is that they give you use of a number for a limited amount of time to do some testing, and then they turn it off. So if you're doing testing with a large amount of time in between your tests, you need to come back in here and get a new trial number every time. Your account ID here, this is your token. This needs to be programmed into ViewLink and along with the authentication token. So these are two pieces of information that come out of the Twilio system that need to go into ViewLink. And then the ViewLink server needs to have a port open for the communication. So you have to make sure that port 12600 is open bidirectionally through your from your ViewLink server through the internet gateway out to Twilio. One of the things with that is that you're opening an inbound port, and in order to open up an inbound port, you're creating a security risk in your system. There's a couple of ways to be able to mitigate this. One is to set it up with no inbound port. All that does is it stops the Twilio service from being able to call back in with authentication. So in other words, when somebody actually gets the call or text message, if they respond to the text message, it hits a dead door. Essentially, it can't call back to the server and do that authentication. So essentially, if you use the call and voice that way, where you're not opening up the inbound port, you're still going to be able to get your voice and your text messages out to the cell phones of your users, but they can't use Twilio as a way of getting back to the server and authenticating. This infographic illustrates the communications that go back and forth between Twilio and the ViewLink system. Essentially, the ViewLink system calls out to Twilio when it has an alarm message that needs to either go by text message or by voice. It always starts with ViewLink. So it goes out port 443, which is always going to be open outbound through your firewalls so the server can talk to other devices on the internet. And the replies come back from the Twilio system through TCP port 12500. Now, in most situations, you're going to configure your inbound gateway to allow data to pass from Twilio into your server through TCP port 12500. That in itself requires IT to be able to map that inbound port. It's a little bit more complicated than what this diagram shows. You actually have to have your server facing the internet to be able to do this. You need that port open. So the way this works is that a text message goes out to Twilio. Twilio forwards that text message to your cell phone, and then you have the option in the SMS interface to be able to send back your PIN code to acknowledge the alarm, and then Twilio will take that information, pass it back to ViewLink. That's how it authenticates the alarm. And in the case where you have the voice dial, that's a little bit more complicated. It will send a telephone number and, of course, all the account information for the ViewLink server calling to the Twilio system to initiate an outbound phone call. Now, this is going to be the first number that's on the list. So when you're setting up a call queue, it'll be the first call. And the first call goes out to the first person on the list, and Twilio will call that number. And then when that number answers, the Twilio system will prompt the user for to play the message. So basically, you have to touch a button, and that button actually triggers the API to call back to the ViewLink system to get the message and play it back. So basically, it asks ViewLink what's the message to play, and then ViewLink sends back the text, and Twilio converts that text into audio for you to hear. And that to actually hear that message, that inbound port needs to be open. If you have a situation where IT is stopping you from being able to open up port 2500, your behavior that you're going to see in the system is that ViewLink will call out to Twilio, will initiate that first telephone call, and then when you go to press the button to acknowledge and play the message, Twilio fails to be able to make the connection back to the server to find out what that message is to play it, and basically your whole session ends. It will give you that middle of the night telephone call, but it won't tell you what it is. So that's the limitations when you don't have that inbound TCP port 12500 open through the firewall. With the SMS, it's a little bit more functional. It'll send the text message to Twilio and all the information, and then Twilio will actually send that out directly to your cell phone. The failure doesn't happen until your cell phone until you try to punch in your PIN code to be able to respond. And that just won't work because it still requires that TCP port 12500 to take that inbound message. So that even if you type it in, it'll never make it to ViewLink. So TCP 12500 needs to be open for this to really function as designed. But I basically given you the highlights of what happens if it's not possible to get through inbound to TCP 12500. And it needs to either be, you can map it through an IP address if you have a static IP, or you can actually use domain DNS to be able to point the port inbound to your server. So there's a couple different ways to do that. But this gives you an overview of what happens if you don't have the optimum setup because of IT restrictions. So that's one of the limitations with this. You have to open up an inbound port for this communication to work, but it can work without it. It's just that you can't actually respond to the notification through Twilio. You have to use a web browser, or you have to answer the email. So typically, when you set this up to notify people, they're also getting an email at the same time. And with most cell phones, you have your business email address right on there, so you have the ability to respond through standard email. So that being said, this is the account setup. I have $4 balance on here to be able to do my test, and I'm going to press the button here to get a trial number. Now, what Twilio is going to do is going to pop up a random telephone number, and you can flip through them if you don't like the telephone number, but I typically just pick whatever number it is. So I'm going to choose this number, and now it says my new telephone number is this one up here. So I'm going to take this number, I'm going to copy it. So now it's in my typing buffer. on my computer. And I'm going to go over here into ViewLink under System Preferences and SMS and voice messaging. These are the two settings where you create the link to the between ViewLink and the Twilio system. So the first one I'm going to go to is the text message, the SMS. Now you have two different options on here. If you have a physical modem attached, you can put in your COM ports and your baud rate. But we're going to use the web service. As you can see, I've already set this up in the past with information that's already been used. So it's populated with some information. By default, yours will come with nothing on it. It'll be empty. So I'm going to paste the telephone number that was given to me from Twilio in this field. And there's two buttons over here that says copy. So I'm going to copy this. That automatically puts in your typographical buffer, and Control V, which is the Windows command for paste. And I paste in the number. And I do the same thing with the authentication token. If you want to actually view it, you click on the show button, but there's really no point in doing it. So I'm going to click on this button here, puts it into typing buffer, highlight this empty field, Control V, drop it in there. And now I have my account ID. You can see this is what it says. There's always information inside of ViewLink that gives you details about what each one of these entries is. And ViewLink URL. So for this thing to work, I actually have to have an open port. This is the open inbound port for Twilio to get to call back to the ViewLink server with acknowledgments, either through voice or through text. So now I have this set up. I'm going to send an SMS text message, and this is going to send it to my telephone number. And click send. Click OK. And you heard the little ding. My cell phone came up with a text message, and it says sent from your Twilio account, and then it says ViewLink test message from ViewLink on server Vim ViewLink 02, that's the actual name of this server. So that's the initial trial response that comes from this when I initiate a test. And I click save on here since I got the message back. SMS is all set up on this system at this point. The next is to go to the voice settings, and essentially I'm going to replicate the exact same process. I'm going to take the new telephone number that I have in here. Note that there's always a plus. Okay. So the next step here is to add the trial number. So just like we did on the first one, adding the trial number, highlight, Control C, and drop the text in there. And I'm going to repeat the same process I did before over here with the account ID. Click and Control V to drop it. Click and Control V to drop it into this window. And this URL is actually incorrect, so I'm going to change it to the correct URL for the system, which is test.viewlink.isola.com. And now it's all set up. So the next step is to actually do a test voice message. And I'm going to pick my telephone number again and click send.
Unknown caller.
As you can hear, my phone's going off.
Unknown caller.
And now I get the call.
You have a trial account. You can remove this message at any time by upgrading to a full account. Press any key to execute your code.
I just pressed 1.
This is a test notification from your ViewLink server, Vim ViewLink 02. Message sent on November 3rd, 2021, 12:26 and 1 second. If you are hearing this message, then the voice settings are correct.
Okay, so I got the message from the system verifying that I actually have the ability to do outbound calls from the ViewLink server through Twilio to a cell phone. Now I'm going to click save, and now this is all set up. So essentially, the trial account is now active on this system. So any thresholds or any device notifications that are mapped to using SMS or voice will now be active. So if an alarm goes off right now, it'll send a text message to my cell phone or a voice message. Okay, so the next step, now that we've actually gone through and set up a trial account and linked the trial account with the system preferences in ViewLink, now we have the ability to create alarm notifications that map to the SMS modem and the voice connection. Let me go back and create a brand new one. Is to click add alarm notification template, and I'm going to put in here Sean test alarm, and I'm going to give permissions to everybody in here to be able to see it. Now the notification escalation path. This is where you set up what happens when an alarm threshold goes off. So this is the actions of the system when an alarm has been triggered. So I'm going to click add, and I'm going to add a voice and an SMS message to this. The default that everyone always uses with notifications to add an email. So this is going to be, I'm just going to call this email test. And this one is going to have no delay associated with it. And it's going to send to myself, Sean Murphy. And you have the options, of course, in here to send recurring notifications, continuing after the alarm has been acknowledged. So there's a lot of different settings that are in here. So essentially I have the first notification going off immediately, and then I'm going to add a text notification. So now this is instead of using the email gateway to send an email out, now it's going to use the SMS gateway through Twilio to send out a message. And I'm going to call this, SMS test. And since everybody has a telephone number that's loaded inside their account in ViewLink, so under users and groups, when you're adding a new user, one of the things that's on the list is your telephone number. And that's critical to have correct. And it's also critical that you have it correct with the plus and the country code embedded in the telephone number. If you don't have that in there correctly, this whole thing doesn't work. It's just to be aware that this is set up for international telephone calls and not just for US domestic. So I'm going to link it to my account on here, which is my telephone number. You notice here that you only have the ability to select people that are part of a group or an individual user on here. You don't have the ability to go in here and manually enter in a telephone number. It's one of the things that exists in ViewLink 5.0 and past, that all fields come from user account. It makes it easier to manage. So on here, I also have all the same settings that I would with the email. So this I'm going to put a I don't want a 10-minute. I'll put a 1-minute delay on this. And I'm going to add a voice notification, and I'm going to put no delay on this. So basically, I'm going to get the text message after the voice. So no delay on this. It says edit call list. This is a little bit different. You have the ability to set the order of the calls. So on here, I have SMS test group, which is already set up inside the system. then I have, which includes me. So I'm going to set up myself on here. It'll show this list. And if I add OPCUA, may add, let me add the administrators to this. Fortunately, I don't have more than one telephone number on here. So this is actually not a great demonstration. But when you add different groups on here, it'll start populating with all the individual people's lists. So you'll see my name, you'll see other people who have accounts on the system. And if you click this up and down button over here, you can change the order of preference. So what this does is it calls user number 1, makes a telephone call to them. If they acknowledge, it'll stop the propagation to the next person, depending on the settings that are in here, whether it continues the call tree or not. So this sets the order of priority of the phone calls. The calls are only a few seconds long, so basically probably within a minute and a half, it's called everybody on the list. So over here, I'm going to click save. Now I'm going to create the name of this notification to voice test. Save. So now I have an alarm template that I set up that has Sean test alarm. And over here, that gives you a nice little summary saying that there's 1 email, 1 text message, and 1 voice. The command over here, if you're not familiar with it, this is actually used with the web relay, which allows you to trip a relay in a facility, or alarm lights, or send a trigger out to an external system using dry contacts. So right now I have my alarm template for notifications set up, and I have several different thresholds that are in here. I have a couple that are set up to automatically generate an alarm simply by having the threshold set to an extremely low level. And I have one here set up for generate humidity alarm. It's tied to 2 locations on my system here, and both of these are going to be reading above 1% humidity, which this is set for. So if I go to this alarm template and map it to a location, it automatically trips the alarm as soon as that particular alarm goes off. So the way to get to that is to go to Sites Manager and go to the specific locations that have that alarm. Okay, now that I've gone through and I've created a threshold template that trips a voice message and an email instantaneously, and sends a text message based upon humidity being above the limit of 1%, I'm going to go in and activate that threshold alarm on an active humidity sensor. So this is a humidity sensor. I'm here in Sites Manager, and I have a humidity channel over here. This is reading somewhere around 60% relative humidity, so it's way above the point to trip that alarm. And I'm going to add a threshold alarm and map it to that threshold alarm that is set up. So add threshold alarms. I need to go to my list and go to the generate RH alarm template that I was looking at before. And this actually is set up to trip at 1% humidity. And now we're going to map that Sean test alarm that I had set up on the that I already set up. So at this point, I have the relative humidity, I have the threshold, I have the limit that's going to trip it. There's no additional delay. You always have the ability to add delays everywhere. An alarm off margin. All this is an ability to stop an alarm from hair triggering back and forth when it goes up or down like 1 decimal place. Another word for this is deadband, which is stop flashing of alarms. ViewLink scans every minute, so it's not a big deal. It's just a feature in here if you want to suppress the alarm, so turning on and off when it's right at the edge. So this is set up with that alarm template that has the text, voice, and email. And once I add this, it becomes active in the system because I'm creating an event where I'm changing all the settings inside of ViewLink. And now I'm putting an alarm that I already know that this sensor is going to trip as soon as the device is scanned and updates data into ViewLink and gets the current value. Now this is connected to an AP10 and an RFL, so it's going to take up to 4 minutes for the next value to come into the system to trip this alarm. So I'm going to click add, and now it's active on the system. And sometime over the next four minutes, as this thing goes through and scans and updates itself, it's going to trip the alarm, and I'm going to get a telephone call, and I'm going to get a text message, and I'm going to get an email coming.
Unknown caller.
You have a trial account. You can remove this message at any time by upgrading to a full account. Press any key to execute your code.
This is an automated notification from your Vizsla ViewLink monitoring system. 109075, a threshold alarm was recorded on October 20th, 2021, 12:53 and 0 seconds UTC-6. On location, Humidity, Demo Labs. In zone, Project Engineering Test Server, ViewLink Demo, Portsmouth, AP10RFL100, indoor locations. Press 1 to repeat this message. Press 2 to acknowledge this alarm and prevent the next person in the list from being called. Please enter your PIN number. The alarm has been acknowledged. Please log into your ViewLink server vim ViewLink 02 for more details about this alarm. Thank you.
Okay, what I went through there is I responded to the text message, and I hit the number 2, and the number 2 set me up to acknowledge the alarm, and then it asked me for a number. The number is actually the PIN number that you set up on your account. So, for example, if I go into my account over here, I have a PIN number associated with this. So I typed in 5593, and it acknowledged the alarm. And I also, at the same time, got a text message that showed up on my cell phone that basically gave the same information the telephone call had. A little bit truncated, doesn't give the entire details, simply because text messages are limited in the amount of characters that you can have. But as you heard from the voice message, it gives you basically the whole directory tree all the way down to the sensor, and tells you what the value was and what the threshold alarm was. And now I'm going to go into sites and actually demonstrate exactly what happened and put in a timeline. So this is sites. This is the humidity channel that I had the alarm go off on. I'm now looking at this in sites and trend. So I'm going to drag and drop this in here. And this gives me the nice graph of humidity over the last hour. If you're familiar with trend views, you have the ability to set the window, include data markers and real-time values. If I click OK, I can get this to be as short as possible, so you can have high resolution, see the specific data points. One of the options on here is to actually show threshold lines. So you see this button down here on the bottom. This says threshold lines. It's by default, it's off. But if I click it on, it'll show my threshold line. So it automatically resets the balance on here. You can play around this to get the RH range to be from 0 to 100%. But essentially, this is picking up at the threshold line is all the way down here at 1%. So you can see for this scan right here, the alarm threshold level was set to 1%. And essentially, this is when the telephone call happened, is when the alarm tripped. So this is logging in, verifying that it had actually exceeded the high threshold. So the high threshold is what the value has to be above in order to trip the alarm. So now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the events, because we actually had an event. We had an alarm event. So the way this is set up is immediately goes to the last events that you had on your system. This basically shows my whole login and all the events that I did leading up to the alarm going off and the acknowledgement. The important things to look at on here is that you have a text acknowledgement on here. So this has the details. If I double click on it, it tells you that I got this text message. It's basically a verification that the message went out and was received. And this says that I acknowledge the alarm. So this is basically the details saying that I, using a remote voice, in other words, typing back in that 2 and then putting in my PIN number, acknowledge this alarm. And that PIN number and my cell phone number, those two things verify it was me inside the system. And this basically says that the call list terminated. In other words, I basically acknowledged the alarm. I stopped it from going on to the next caller on the list. So this gives you the detail for what happened with Twilio, but you also see the email text subject. So I got an email that came out of the system at the same time, and this one gives me what the email subject is, essentially saying that there's a ticket number that comes out of the ViewLink system, and it tells me exactly what happened, time generated, and the 2 places it went to. If you notice on here, this is an interesting little thing that you can do with ViewLink systems, which is to use the text to email to text conversion. So I have 2 different email addresses on here for email. I have the one that's set up with my telephone number and vzw.net, which is Verizon.net, which is my cellular phone service. So essentially, I'm using text conversion here to be able to bypass the need for Twilio SMS. But it's not always available everywhere. Not every cell phone supports this. And my regular email address. So it's sending an email here, and it's sending an email here to my cell phone, but it's sending the actual text from the email. So some things get dropped off when you set it up this way. You kind of have to play around with the settings to make sure that this actually sends the email in a short enough path that it actually fits inside a cell phone. So it's a little bit of tweaking that's necessary to get this to work properly. But essentially, this is the email information verification. That email went out, and it actually sent it to both a cell phone and to my email account.